Isolde confronts the gardener in the greenhouse and forces them to reveal Seraphine's true name through leverage. She threatens to destroy the grave roses, trapping Leora forever. The greenhouse exhaled decay. Isolde pushed through the iron-framed doors, and the heat struck her like a physical thing. Stale air that clung to her skin, heavy with grave rose perfume, and something underneath it, something that smelled like copper left in the sun. Her cloak caught on the warped glass of the entrance, and she jerked it free, not bothering with grace. The gardener stood at the chamber's center, silhouetted against the massive glass case where the grave roses writhed. They weren't moving in wind. There was no wind here. The blooms twisted on their stems with deliberate, hungry motion, their petals black as dried blood. Around the case, candles guttered in some current Isolde couldn't feel, casting shadows that seemed to have weight. "You've been playing a dangerous game, gardener," Isolde said. Her voice carried across the glass corridors, bouncing back at her from a dozen cracked panes. "I know your secrets now." The gardener turned. In the sickly light filtering through the greenhouse roof, they looked less like a man than a sketch of one, the black coat hanging loose, fingers that moved with the deliberation of something learning how to use joints. Their eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "Ah, Lady Isolde," a smile that didn't reach those eyes, "you think you hold all the cards, but you underestimate the power of the roses." Isolde stepped closer, her boot crunching on broken glass. The sound echoed. She kept her hand steady as she withdrew the vial from her cloak, the rose-destroying potion she'd brewed from the botanical texts hidden in the estate library. The liquid inside caught the candlelight, glowing faintly amber. The gardener's fingers brushed against the nearby grave rose, and the thorns pierced their skin. They didn't flinch. Instead, luminous sap, not red, but something that shimmered like diluted starlight, beaded at the punctures and dripped to the mosaic floor below. That's when Seraphine appeared. Not entered, appeared. One moment the far corner of the greenhouse held only shadow and overgrown vines, and the next the Duchess glided through them as if the glass walls had parted for her. Her gown of midnight velvet moved like liquid, and the blackening veins on her arms seemed to pulse with their own light. "Oh, this is delightful," Seraphine said, her voice carrying the particular amusement of someone watching a trapped animal. "The little vixen thinks she can threaten my garden?" Isolde's throat went dry. She had known Seraphine would be here. The Duchess was always present, hovering at the edges of her own cursed domain. But seeing her now, watching this confrontation with the kind of hunger that suggested she'd orchestrated every moment, made something in Isolde's chest compress. The gardener took a step toward her, and Isolde raised the vial higher, not a threat yet, a promise. "You'll regret this, Seraphine," Isolde said. "I'll destroy every last grave rose if I have to." She meant it. The words tasted like ash, but she meant them. The Duchess's laughter echoed, a hollow chime that seemed to whisper through the chamber, and she moved closer, her shadow sprawling across the shattered glass. The grave roses in the case trembled, their vines wrapping more tightly around the iron framework. "No, my lady," the gardener said quietly. "You see, the roses are bound to Seraphine's spirit. Destroy them, and you doom Leora to an eternity trapped within." The gardener's hand came down on Isolde's shoulder. She felt it through her cloak, cold, not like flesh, but like touching the underside of river ice. She didn't pull away, not yet. "The roses are all that keeps her from the dark," the gardener continued, their voice barely above a whisper. "They are her anchor. Burn them and she falls." Isolde's breath caught. This was the moment she'd feared, the trap inside the trap. Of course Seraphine would bind Leora's spirit to the very thing that sustained her. It was elegant in its cruelty. Destroy the roses, save Leora from the gardener's obsession, and condemn her to something worse. Leave them alive, and the gardener continued their work, continued feeding the estate's hunger. "Oh, what a delightful dilemma," Seraphine whispered, close enough now that Isolde could smell her grave rose perfume and something else, something that smelled like the inside of a tomb, the fate of a lost soul hanging by a thread. Seraphine's laughter echoed through the greenhouse, bouncing off glass and iron until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The candles flared, and in that sudden brightness Isolde saw the shelves behind the case clearly, jars lined up in rows, each one containing something that had once been human, faces frozen in terror, hands curled like claws against the glass. She forced her gaze back to the gardener. "Tell me her true name," Isolde said. Her voice didn't shake. "The one the Lord bound you with. Tell me, or I burn every rose in this greenhouse. She'll be trapped forever." The gardener's fingers tightened on her shoulder. Vines, there were actually vines now, she realized with a start of horror, began to creep along the seam between cloak and skin. The gardener was coming apart at the edges, literally unraveling. "You would condemn her to eternal darkness to save yourself?" the gardener asked, and there was something almost human in their voice for the first time, something that sounded like pleading. Isolde held the lamp higher. The heat from the flame was close enough to warm her face, and the grave roses in the case shuddered at the proximity. They wanted the light, they feared it. "I would free her from you," Isolde said. The gardener's hand fell away from her shoulder. "That's not freedom," they whispered. "That's mercy I don't deserve to grant." For a moment nothing moved. The greenhouse seemed to hold its breath. The vines stilled, the grave roses ceased their writhing, even Seraphine's laughter faded to a low, expectant hum. Then the gardener's lips began to move. The sound that emerged wasn't quite a word. It was something that made the greenhouse air itself shudder, a name that seemed to vibrate through the glass and iron, through the broken mosaic floor and the jars of preserved horror. It was a name in a language that predated speech, and hearing it felt like understanding something fundamental about the nature of binding, of death, of the cost of resurrection. The grave roses shrieked. It was an actual sound, high and keening, like metal under stress. The vines coiled tighter around the case, and luminous sap sprayed across the glass, leaving trails that glowed faintly in the dark. Isolde felt the weight of what she'd just done settle across her shoulders like a second cloak. She had the name now. She could use it. She could break Seraphine's hold, shatter the magic that kept Leora suspended in this green hell. But she'd done it by threatening the one thing the gardener lived for, by making them choose between their obsession and mercy. Seraphine's expression shifted. The amusement drained from her porcelain features, replaced by something sharper, colder. She looked at Isolde with new eyes, not as a pawn anymore, but as something dangerous. "Well," the Duchess said softly, "perhaps I've underestimated you after all." The gardeners sank to their knees, fingers reaching toward the grave roses with the desperation of someone watching their life's work crumble. Isolde kept the lamp steady. She didn't lower it. Outside, somewhere beyond the greenhouse walls, the estate's bells began to toll.